"You'll regret this. I won't obey," native girl said when the cowboy paid $2 for her at the auction. The sun had barely begun to climb over the horizon when the small town of Red Creek stirred to life. Dust rose from the wooden streets as people arrived, boots clacking on the planks and wagon wheels creaking in the quiet morning. Today was auction day, a day that always drew crowds from far and wide. Farmers, cowboys, traders, and curious townsfolk gathered to buy livestock, tools, and occasionally humans. The very thought made some uneasy, but it was a reality that no one could ignore in these parts. Among the people in the square stood a young native girl. Her hair, dark and flowing, shimmered in the sunlight, and her eyes were sharp and alert, observing every movement around her. She wore a simple dress worn at the edges but clean, and her posture was proud and unyielding. Though she appeared small in stature, there was a fire within her that no one could miss. She had been brought here under circumstances she had never imagined, and yet she refused to let fear show on her face. Her mind raced with thoughts of escape, but her body remained still, like a statue carved from determination. Desperate, the auctioneer, a man with a booming voice and a sharp eye for the crowd, stood atop a raised platform. He gestured to the girl and began his usual speech, describing her as though she were an object for sale. The words stung her ears, but she refused to flinch.
Around her, people whispered and nudged each other, some smirking, others shaking their heads.
She could feel their eyes, heavy with judgment and curiosity. Some thought she would break, that she would cry or beg, but they were wrong. She would not show them the power to hurt her spirit. One by one, the bidders called out numbers. A farmer offered a few coins. Another man raised his voice with a higher sum, and yet the girl's resolve only grew stronger. She knew that each bid represented an attempt to control her, to make her obey someone else's rules. She clenched her fists lightly at her sides, reminding herself that no amount of money could buy her dignity or her will. The murmurs of the crowd rose in anticipation, and she felt a sudden tension in the air, as if the entire town were holding its breath. Then out of the crowd a quiet figure stepped forward. He was a cowboy, wearing a worn hat that shaded his face and a long coat that flapped slightly in the breeze. His eyes were calm, steady, and unreadable, unlike the excitement or greed flashing in the eyes of the other men. He didn't shout or wave his hand, nor did he try to make a spectacle of himself. Instead, he simply nodded to the auctioneer and spoke. His voice, low but firm. $2, he said. A hush fell over the square. People blinked in surprise, exchanging confused glances. $2. It was almost laughable, far less than anyone expected. Some laughed outright, thinking the cowboy was joking or trying to humiliate the auctioneer. Others whispered behind cupped hands, wondering if he was foolish or cunning. The girl, however, froze for a moment, her heart racing. Desperate. $2. That was all it took for someone to claim her presence, at least in the eyes of the crowd. Her mind scrambled, refusing to accept it. "You'll regret this!" she shouted, her voice sharp and clear. "I won't obey." The words cut through the air like a whip, startling everyone who heard them. Some gasped at her defiance, while others murmured that she was brave or reckless. The cowboy didn't flinch. He tilted his head slightly, studying her with the same calm gaze he had when he first bid. He didn't answer her, but there was a strange steadiness in him that made her pause. She could see that he was different from the others, that he was not here to hurt or humiliate her. Desperate. Yet that did not stop her from being angry or defiant. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. The auctioneer, clearly flustered by the unexpected turn, banged his gavel to regain control. "Sold! To the gentleman in the hat," he announced, trying to project authority. The crowd murmured again, a mix of surprise and curiosity. Desperate, whispers ran through the onlookers. Who was this cowboy? Why did he pay so little? Brett. What did he intend to do with the girl? Some shook their heads, unable to comprehend the situation, while others simply shrugged and turned away, uninterested in interfering. Brett. As the girl was gently led toward the cowboy, she kept her chin high and her eyes fixed on him, refusing to show any weakness. She fidgeted slightly, testing the limits of her control, but he remained patient, silent, and firm. Brett. It was unlike anything she had experienced before. She had expected rough treatment, commands shouted in anger, or hands gripping her arms harshly. Brett. Instead, there was only a quiet strength in his presence, an assurance that she could not ignore. And yet, she did not trust it. Brett. Not yet. The cowboy did not speak much during the short walk back to his horse. He allowed her space, letting her move freely, and only occasionally glanced at her, assessing her without judgment. The girl noticed these small gestures, even if she would never admit it. She began to see that he might be different from everyone else who had ever claimed ownership over her. It was a small glimmer of hope in the midst of a situation that otherwise seemed hopeless. The townsfolk watched silently as the two disappeared into the distance, dust rising from their path and sunlight glinting off the cowboy's spurred boots. Brett. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered that the girl would never survive this, that she would run away or rebel endlessly. Brett. The girl herself remained silent, her mind buzzing with thoughts of freedom, defiance, and survival. She knew that the journey ahead would be difficult, that the path would be filled with challenges and tests of her courage. But deep down, she felt a strange spark of curiosity about the man who had paid so little, yet seemed so unthreatening.
Who was he, really?
Rest. And why did he not strike fear into her heart as everyone else had? That evening, as the town settled back into its routines and the sun dipped low behind the hills, the girl found a quiet moment to reflect. Brett. She remembered her life before the auction, the home she had known, the people she had loved, and the traditions that had shaped her. She also thought of the cowboy, his calm demeanor, and the odd sense of respect he seemed to show. Brett. She could not yet understand him, nor could she trust him. But she knew one thing with certainty. She would not bow down, and she would not obey unless she chose to. The fire within her remained unextinguished. Brett. As night fell, the girl lay under the stars, the events of the day replaying in her mind. The auction, the bids, the jeers of the crowd, and the cowboy's quiet calm. All of it swirled together like a storm of emotions. Brett. She clenched her fists once more and whispered to herself, I won't obey. I won't be broken. Brett. And somewhere in the distance, perhaps the cowboy felt the same weight of the day, the same sense of uncertainty, and the same glimmer of something new beginning. The first chapter of her journey had ended, but the story was far from over. Brett. There would be tests, struggles, and moments of fear, yet also chances for understanding, courage, and unlikely friendships. Brett. She did not yet know what lay ahead, but she would face it as she had faced this day, with fire in her eyes, strength in her heart, and a voice that would not be silenced. The journey from the auction to the cowboy's ranch was long, the road winding through dusty plains and sparse forests. The young native girl walked beside the cowboy, her steps quick and sharp, though she tried to appear calm. Brett. She kept her gaze fixed on the ground most of the time, but every so often she glanced at him out of the corner of her eye. His face remained calm, unreadable, like stone in the heat of the afternoon sun. Brett. He did not speak much, only occasionally giving a word of instruction or pointing to the path ahead. Even in silence, there was a strange kind of control in the way he moved, calm, confident, and patient.
Breath.
Yet she refused to be impressed. She would not let herself be swayed by his quiet presence.
Brit. When they finally arrived at the ranch, the sun was beginning to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. The ranch was simple but sturdy. Brit. A small wooden house sat in the middle of a wide clearing, surrounded by fences that enclosed a few grazing horses and cattle. The girl had expected something harsh and unforgiving, but the place seemed peaceful in a rough, natural way. Brit. She noted the neatness of the buildings, the careful arrangement of tools, and the gentle way the animals moved around. Despite herself, she felt a flicker of curiosity. Brit. The cowboy led her to the house but did not push her inside. He waited at the doorway, hands resting lightly on the rail, giving her space. But she stiffened, unsure of what to do. She had expected anger or force, not this calm, quiet patience. Brit.
Her mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. Was he pretending to be kind?
Brit. Was this a trap? Or was he truly different from the others who had tried to control her in the past? Brit. I don't need you to order me around, she said finally, her voice sharp and full of suspicion. I can do things on my own. Brit. I don't expect you to obey anyone who doesn't deserve it, he said simply. Brit. His words were quiet but firm, and they carried a weight she couldn't ignore. There was no anger in them. No mockery, just truth. Brit. She stared at him, unsure what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Brit. Usually people assumed she would follow their commands without question, but he was different. He didn't demand anything from her. Brit. The first few hours on the ranch were tense. The cowboy showed her where she could rest for the night, a small room with a simple bed, clean linens, and a window that opened to the fields. But it was not luxurious, but it was safe. He left her there, giving her privacy which made her feel both cautious and curious. Brit. She explored the room slowly, touching the wooden walls and glancing out the window at the wide expanse of land. The silence of the place was strange. Brit.
In the auction house, the noise and shouting had been constant. Here, there was only the wind in the trees and the low murmur of the animals.
Eventually, hunger drove her out of her room. She found the kitchen where the cowboy had already prepared a simple meal. Bread, some cured meat, and fresh water sat on the wooden table. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should eat, but the smell made her stomach rumble. Brit. She picked up the bread and bit into it, savoring the taste. It was not fancy, but it was warm and filling.
Brit.
A cowboy watched quietly from across the table, not saying a word, just observing her. She kept her eyes on her food, unwilling to meet his gaze.
Brit. Days passed, each one testing her patience and resilience. She refused to obey chores at first, doing only what she chose and ignoring instructions that she felt were unnecessary. The cowboy never forced her, though he often reminded her gently of what needed to be done. The horses need water, he might say, or the fence needs fixing before the rain comes. Brit. She would respond with a sharp word or a shake of her head, but eventually, curiosity and practicality led her to help in small ways. She realized quickly that he did not demand her work to control her. He asked it because the work was necessary. One afternoon, as she was carrying water to the horses, a thought struck her. The cowboy had not raised his voice, not once, despite her defiance. He did not threaten nor scold her. He had not touched her, nor had he tried to impose his will. But she had expected cruelty, as she had seen too often in the world. But all she found was calm patience. She wondered why he was different. Brit. Was it because he understood her, or was it something else entirely? She did not know, and part of her wanted to find out. But at night, by the fire in the small living room, the cowboy would sometimes talk about simple things, how to care for the animals, the weather patterns, or his childhood on the frontier. He never pried into her past, never forced her to reveal more than she wanted. But the girl listened, sometimes quietly, sometimes with small questions. Testing the waters of conversation, she began to feel something unfamiliar, a cautious respect for this man who treated her not as property, but as a person. Brit. Despite these small moments of understanding, tension remained. She still had days when she wanted to run, when anger and fear bubbled up inside her. Brit desperate. She would storm off into the fields, shouting or muttering to herself, determined to prove she could not be controlled. The cowboy always let her go, following only at a distance to ensure her safety. But he never scolded, never shouted, never tried to pull her back. Sometimes she would stop mid-run and realize he was there, quietly watching, waiting for her to return on her own. But that alone taught her a lesson about trust and patience she had never learned before. She also began noticing the little things about him. Brit. The way he treated the animals with care, speaking softly to the horses and brushing the cattle gently. The way he repaired fences meticulously, never rushing, always ensuring they were strong. Brit. The way he respected the land, leaving areas untouched and conserving water where it was scarce. Slowly, she started to understand that his strength was not in force or anger, but in steadiness and care. Brit. She had never encountered a man like this before, and it made her both curious and wary. One evening, after a long day of chores and quiet observation, the girl finally spoke. Brit. "Why did you pay $2 for me?" she asked, her voice cautious but filled with genuine curiosity. The cowboy looked at her, and for the first time a small smile appeared on his face. Brit.
I didn't buy you to control you, he said. I paid because I wanted to give you a chance to be safe, a chance to live freely.
Brit. That's all. She blinked, caught off guard by the simplicity and honesty of his words. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Brit. She wanted to argue, to protest that she didn't need anyone's protection, but deep down she felt a flicker of understanding. He did not see her as a prize, or as someone to own. Brit. He saw her as a person, someone with her own will, her own spirit. That realization confused her, but it also intrigued her. Brit. The nights continued to be quiet, filled with stars and the occasional hoot of an owl or the low call of a coyote. She would lie awake in her small room thinking about the cowboy, the auction, and the strange new life she had been thrust into. Desperate, she felt a mixture of fear, curiosity, and a growing sense of cautious trust. She did not yet like or fully understand him, but she could feel that he was different from everyone else who had ever tried to control her. But by the end of the first week, small changes began to appear. But she helped with chores without being asked, not out of obedience, but out of curiosity and practicality. She began talking more during meals, sharing small stories about her childhood or her tribe. Brit. The cowboy listened without judgment, never interrupting, never forcing her to reveal more than she wanted. The girl began to realize that trust was not something given lightly, but something earned, and that perhaps she could earn it, or at least understand it, in her own way. And though she still refused to obey blindly, she began to see that life on the ranch was not the same as life at the auction or in the town. Here she had space, she had choice, and most importantly, she had a chance to learn what it meant to live under her own terms, even while being near someone else. The cowboy did not demand her loyalty, but he offered respect, patience, and safety, the very things she had longed for in a world that often offered none. By the end of the second week, the girl began to understand that this new life would be difficult, full of work and learning. But it was different from anything she had known. She did not yet like the cowboy fully, and she certainly did not trust him completely. but she began to see the value in patience, quiet strength, and calm guidance. The fire within her remained, but now it was tempered by a cautious understanding that perhaps not all people wished to harm her. The chapter closed with her standing on the porch of the small ranch house, the wind brushing her hair across her face. She looked out over the fields and the animals, feeling a mixture of defiance, curiosity, and cautious hope. The cowboy stood a few steps away, quietly observing the horizon. Neither spoke, yet both understood that this was only the beginning of a journey filled with challenges, lessons, and perhaps a bond that could grow from respect, patience, and understanding. Days turned into weeks on the ranch, and the young native girl began to settle into a cautious rhythm. She still carried the fire of defiance within her, but the initial shock and anger of the auction had faded into something more complex. She found herself observing the cowboy more closely, noticing small gestures and habits that revealed a deeper layer of his character. He rose early every morning, tending to the animals before the sun had fully risen. He worked steadily, never rushing, and often paused to ensure the horses and cattle were comfortable. It was hard work, exhausting even to watch, and yet he did it with a calm patience that fascinated her. She began to help more willingly, though on her own terms. At first, she fetched water for the animals or swept the porch simply because it was easier than arguing. But gradually, she noticed that her work mattered. The horses seemed healthier, the fences stronger, the small garden thriving because of her effort. This gave her a sense of purpose she had not felt before. Unlike the auction where she was treated as a commodity, here she could see the results of her actions and feel pride in them. One afternoon, while mending a broken fence post, she accidentally cut her hand on a splinter. The cowboy, who had been repairing the roof of the barn, noticed immediately and came down to help. Without hesitation, he washed the cut gently and wrapped it with a clean cloth. "You need to be careful," he said softly. She pulled her hand away, embarrassed and angry that he had seen her moment of weakness. "I don't need your help," she snapped. He did not argue or scold her. He simply nodded, leaving the cloth in place and giving her space. "I'm not trying to control you," he said calmly. "I just don't want you to get hurt." The simplicity of his words confused her. No one had ever cared about her safety without demanding something in return. She glared at him for a moment, then muttered under her breath,
I can take care of myself. But later, as she sat by the fence cleaning and bandaging the cut herself, she found her thoughts returning to him. Why did he treat her with patience instead of anger?
Why did he give her space instead of trying to dominate her?
She did not trust him fully, but the curiosity was growing and she began to watch him more carefully.
She saw the way he treated the animals, how he respected the land, and even the way he paused to admire the sunset. There was a steadiness to him that she had never known before, a quiet strength that did not need to shout or demand obedience. One morning she awoke to the sound of birds chirping and the soft lowing of cows in the distance. The cowboy had already begun feeding the animals, and she watched from the porch as he worked. Something about the scene struck her, a sense of peace she had never experienced. She remembered the auction, the shouting crowd, and the fear she had felt, and realized how different life on the ranch could be. The fear was not gone, but it was quieter now, replaced by a cautious curiosity about the world around her and the man who had brought her here. Slowly, she began to open up in small ways. During meals, she would share short stories about her childhood, about the forest and rivers near her village, and about the traditions of her people. The cowboy listened quietly, never interrupting or judging, sometimes asking simple questions that encouraged her to continue. It felt strange to talk without fear of punishment or ridicule. She noticed that he asked questions not to mock her, but to learn. For the first time, She felt that someone was genuinely interested in understanding her life and experiences. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, she decided to show him something from her own world. She retrieved a small carved piece of wood she had brought with her, a simple figure of an animal. "We make these in my village," she explained, her voice soft. "It represents courage and protection." The cowboy took the figure gently in his hands, examining it carefully. "It's beautiful," he said.
And it has meaning. I can see that. She felt a small surge of pride.
No one had ever acknowledged the value of her culture before. This simple recognition made her heart feel lighter, though she would not admit it openly. Despite these moments of understanding, conflict still arose. She had a strong will and was not afraid to express it.
There were mornings when she refused to help with chores, insisting on staying in her room or wandering the fields. There were afternoons when she argued about how the work should be done, believing her way was better.
Yet, the cowboy remained patient. He never forced her or raised his voice.
He would calmly explain why something needed to be done a certain way and then step back, letting her decide. Sometimes she would ignore him entirely, but other times she would try his method and be surprised at how effective it was. Each small success, each minor lesson learned, built a fragile bridge between them. The girl began to notice something else, moments when he seemed to understand her feelings without words. Round and desperate past. Once, when a storm rolled in suddenly, she froze, unsure how to secure the animals in time. He appeared silently at her side, guiding her with quiet gestures and calm instructions. They worked together, side by side, moving quickly but without panic. By the time the rain began to fall in heavy sheets, the animals were safe, and she realized that she had trusted him completely in that moment, without hesitation. The feeling was strange and unsettling, yet it carried a sense of relief she had never known.
Their conversations began to deepen as well.
She would tell him stories of her family, of festivals, dances, and the lessons her elders had taught her. He shared stories, too, of his childhood, the struggles of growing up on the frontier, and the lessons learned from hard work and patience. These exchanges were not forced but flowed naturally, building a tentative friendship. She found herself listening more than speaking, but the act of sharing still gave her a sense of connection she had not felt since before the auction. One day, while walking along a creek near the ranch, she paused to watch the water ripple over the stones. She had spent much of her life near rivers and streams, and the sound of running water reminded her of home. The cowboy walked beside her quietly, not pushing her to talk but simply sharing the space. After a long moment, she spoke. "I never thought I could feel safe again," she said softly, almost to herself. He looked at her, nodding slightly, understanding without comment. That quiet understanding said more than words ever could.
Through these small moments, a sense of mutual respect grew.
She learned to follow some of his guidance, not out of fear, but because she recognized its wisdom. He learned to trust her judgment and independence, understanding that she had her own strengths and knowledge that were valuable. Their relationship was no longer one of mere proximity or obligation. It was becoming a partnership, however fragile. Yet she remained cautious, desperate. She had been betrayed and controlled before, and the fear of being trapped never fully disappeared. She tested boundaries, sometimes deliberately, sometimes unconsciously. Description methods, and assert her independence in small ways. Each time the cowboy responded with patience, never anger, never punishment. Gradually, she realized that his strength lay not in dominance but in respect. He did not need to control her to maintain authority. By the end of the third week, a quiet routine had settled over the ranch. She woke early, helped with the animals, prepared meals, and occasionally wandered the fields, exploring the land. The cowboy worked alongside her, guiding when necessary, but allowing her space to learn and grow. The fire of defiance still burned within her, but it was now tempered by understanding, curiosity, and a growing sense of trust. She began to see the ranch not as a prison but as a place where she could live freely, make choices, and learn from someone who respected her as a person. The chapter closed with a scene that would linger in her memory. She and the cowboy stood on a hill overlooking the ranch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The wind carried the scents of earth and grass, and the sounds of the animals returning for the night filled the air. She felt a sense of calm she had not known for a long time. He said nothing and she said nothing, but the silence was not uncomfortable. It was understanding. In that quiet moment, she realized that perhaps trust and respect could exist even after fear and defiance, and that life could be more than survival. It could be connection, growth, and understanding. Life on the ranch had settled into a fragile but comforting routine when trouble arrived unexpectedly. It began as a quiet morning, the sun just peeking over the distant hills, painting the land in warm, golden light. The girl had woken early, as usual, and was tending to the animals when she noticed a small group of strangers approaching from the far side of the fields. At first, she thought they were travelers or traders, but something about their hurried pace and the way they moved unsettled her. She could sense danger before she could even name it. She ran to the cowboy, her steps swift and urgent.
There are people coming, she called, her voice tense. I don't think they mean well.
He looked up from feeding the horses, his eyes narrowing as he followed her gaze toward the approaching figures. He did not panic, but his expression became serious. "Rasp, stay close to me," he said quietly, his calm tone belying the urgency of the moment. The strangers were outsiders from the town, men who had heard about the auction and the girl, Some of them sought to claim her, seeing her as someone they could control or exploit. Others simply came out of curiosity or greed, but the girl did not care for their reasons. She only knew that she had to protect herself, and she had to trust the cowboy to do the same. She felt a surge of fear, but also a strange strength, knowing that he was by her side. The cowboy quickly assessed the situation. He herded the animals into a secure pen and then took the girl behind a thick line of trees near the edge of the property. "We have to stay hidden," he said calmly. "I don't want to fight unless we have no choice." "Follow my lead." She nodded, her heart pounding, and they crouched low among the branches, watching the men draw closer. The girl could hear their voices now, rough and harsh, demanding to see the property owner. The cowboy stayed silent, motioning for her to remain quiet. He studied the men carefully, noting their movements, their numbers, and their intentions. She felt a mix of fear and awe at his composure. While she had panicked before in dangerous situations, he remained calm, calculating, and in control.
It gave her a strange sense of security, even as the threat loomed.
Suddenly, one of the men spotted the animals and shouted. The others followed, their voices rising in anger and excitement. The girl felt a surge of panic, but the cowboy remained steady. "Stay low and move slowly," he whispered. "We can guide them away from the house." Using quiet hand signals, he led her through the trees and along a hidden path that twisted around the property. They moved carefully, making sure the men could not see them. And gradually, the group of strangers became distracted by the livestock they had discovered. Despite their careful movement, the girl tripped over a root, stumbling into a small clearing. One of the men turned sharply, and for a moment she thought she had been discovered. Her heart leapt into her throat, and she froze, expecting the worst. But the cowboy was quick. He stepped forward, blocking her from view and raising his hand in a firm, commanding gesture. Britt. "Back off!" he shouted, his voice strong and unwavering. The men paused, surprised by his sudden boldness. Britt. The cowboy did not strike them, nor did he attack. He simply stood there, his presence commanding attention and respect. Britt. His confidence and composure seemed to make the men hesitate, unsure of how to proceed. The girl realized in that moment that his strength was not in violence alone, but in the quiet power of courage and control. Britt. He was unafraid, and that fearlessness had a protective weight she had never experienced before. The men muttered among themselves, trying to decide whether to press forward or retreat. The cowboy slowly backed toward the trees with the girl, keeping them both hidden. "We need to get to the barn," he whispered. "Britt, there's a safe place there. Stay close and follow me exactly." She nodded, her mind racing, but her trust in him unwavering. Britt. Together they moved through the underbrush, careful to remain unseen, until they reached the barn at the far edge of the ranch.
Inside the barn, the girl found a sense of safety she had not known in weeks.
Britt. The cowboy had already secured the doors and windows, making sure there were no openings for anyone to enter. He turned to her and said softly, "You did well." Britt.
"Stay quiet, and we'll get through this together." She could feel her chest rising and falling with the force of her fear and adrenaline, but his calm presence grounded her.
Britt. For the first time, she realized that trust could be earned not by words alone, but by actions in moments of danger. The hours passed slowly as the strangers searched the property, their frustration growing at not finding the girl or the cowboy. Britt. The girl stayed close to him, leaning against the rough wooden wall of the barn, watching his every move. She noticed how he remained patient, even when the men outside shouted and banged on fences. Britt. He did not panic. He did not yell. Britt. He simply waited, calculating, and planning their next move. She had never seen anyone face danger with such calm determination. Britt. Eventually, the strangers gave up and left, muttering threats as they retreated toward the town. The girl felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she did not relax entirely. Britt. She had seen the danger clearly, and she knew that the world could be cruel and unpredictable. Yet she also felt something new, a sense of confidence that she could face challenges, especially with someone she could trust by her side. The cowboy looked at her and nodded, as if reading her thoughts. "You were brave," he said quietly.
Britt. "And so was I, but we did it together."
That night, as they sat near the fire in the small ranch house, the girl could not help but reflect on the day. She realized that the danger they had faced had changed something between them.
Britt. She had tested her fear and her courage, and the cowboy had shown her that strength did not always mean fighting. Sometimes it meant patience, planning, and calm determination. Britt. She felt a strange sense of respect for him, though she still would not admit it aloud. Over the next few days, they repaired the areas of the ranch that had been exposed during the attempted intrusion. She worked alongside him, mending fences, reinforcing gates, and securing the animals. She felt a new appreciation for the land and for the quiet strength of the cowboy who guided her. Britt. Each task completed was a small victory, a reminder that they could face challenges together and emerge stronger. During a quiet moment in the afternoon, she finally spoke about her feelings. "Desperate. I was scared today," she admitted, her voice soft. "But I wasn't alone." Britt. You didn't panic, and that made me feel safe." The cowboy nodded, his eyes gentle but firm. Britt. "Fear is natural," he said. "But courage is choosing to act even when you are afraid."
You showed courage today.
Heart swelled with a mixture of pride and humility.
Britt. No one had ever praised her for bravery before. They had only punished her for mistakes. This recognition felt different. It was honest and deserved. Britt.
As the sun set over the ranch, casting long shadows across the fields, the girl realized that her understanding of strength and trust had changed. She had always believed that independence meant doing everything alone, that bravery meant defying everyone else.
But now, she saw that trust and collaboration could be a form of strength too. She did not need to obey blindly, nor did she need to face danger entirely alone. But together they could achieve more than either could alone. By the end of this week, the girl felt a deeper bond forming with the cowboy. But she still had moments of defiance and testing, but she had also begun to see the value of patience, respect, and cooperation. The crisis had shown her that life on the ranch, while still unpredictable and sometimes dangerous, could also be a place of learning, growth, and even trust. But she had faced fear and emerged stronger, and she had discovered that the cowboy's calm presence was a strength she could rely on without sacrificing her independence. One evening, as they stood on the porch looking at the stars, she realized that she no longer saw him merely as someone who had bought her at an auction. He was a guide, a protector, and perhaps, in time, a friend. She felt a strange warmth in her chest, a feeling she did not fully understand, but she knew it was something important.
It was the beginning of a connection built not on ownership, but on mutual respect and shared experience.
The night was quiet, the ranch bathed in silver moonlight. The girl felt a sense of calm and reflection she had not known before. The events of the past days had tested her courage, her patience, and her understanding of trust. She realized that life could be unpredictable and frightening, but it could also offer moments of clarity, learning, and connection. Desperate. She had faced fear and danger, and in doing so, she had discovered a strength she did not know she possessed. And though challenges would continue, she understood one crucial truth. She did not have to face them alone. With patience, courage, and mutual respect, she and the cowboy had built a partnership that could weather storms, face threats, and grow stronger with time. The fire within her still burned, but it was now tempered by understanding, courage, and a fledgling sense of trust, a trust that would continue to guide her in the days ahead. The days following the attempted intrusion on the ranch settled into a calm, productive rhythm. The girl had grown more confident in her abilities, tending to the animals, repairing fences, and learning to navigate the wide expanse of the ranch with skill and care. The cowboy remained a constant presence, quiet, patient, and steady, but never demanding or controlling. She began to realize that life on the ranch offered something she had never truly experienced. Choice. Every action she took, every decision she made, was hers. She could accept guidance or refuse it, help when she wished, or simply observe. This freedom, combined with the sense of safety he provided, was slowly reshaping the way she saw the world. One morning, the girl rose early and went to the creek that ran along the edge of the ranch. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and the soft sound of it flowing over the stones brought a sense of peace she hadn't felt since before the auction. The cowboy appeared quietly behind her, carrying a small bucket. "Good morning," he said softly. She nodded, her eyes fixed on the water. For a moment they stood in silence, sharing the calm of the morning.
I never thought I could feel this,
she admitted after a while, her voice barely above a whisper.
Safe.
Calm. Free. She glanced at him, seeing a faint smile cross his face. "It's because you've chosen to be here," he said simply. "You are not being forced. You are choosing your own path." The word struck her deeply. She had spent so much of her life being told what to do, where to go, and how to act. The idea that she could make her own choices without punishment was almost foreign, yet profoundly comforting. They spent the morning working together on the garden, planting vegetables and tending to the small patch of land that provided fresh food for the ranch. The girl found joy in the simple act of planting seeds, watching the earth yield to her hands. She noticed the cowboy watching her from time to time, not judging, not correcting, just observing. She felt a sense of connection growing, a bond based on mutual respect rather than fear or obligation. By afternoon, they had finished the chores, and the girl wandered to the hill overlooking the ranch. From this vantage point, she could see the entirety of the land, the house, the barn, the fields, and the distant forest line. The wind tugged at her hair, and she felt a strange mixture of pride and freedom. This land, though not her home, was now a place where she could live without constant fear. She realized that she had come far from the day she had been sold at the auction for $2. She had survived, adapted, and even learned to trust. The cowboy joined her on the hill, sitting a few steps away. "You've grown," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. She glanced at him, curious. "I have," she asked, raising an eyebrow. He nodded. "You've learned patience, courage, and trust. You've faced fear and danger, and yet you remain strong. That is growth."
She felt a warmth in her chest at his words, but she quickly looked away, pretending not to notice.
Their conversation turned to the future. The girl, who had always believed her life was dictated by others, began to consider her own choices. "I don't have to leave, do I?" she asked cautiously. The cowboy shook his head. "No," he said. "You are free to stay or go. The choice is yours." The freedom inherent in his words was almost overwhelming. She realized that no one had ever given her that before. Every decision she had made in the past had been constrained by circumstance or force. Here, she could truly decide for herself. Over the next few days, she tested this newfound freedom in small ways. She chose when to work, how to care for the animals, and even how to organize her living space. Picturesque. Each choice reinforced her sense of independence and self-respect. The cowboy continued to offer guidance when necessary, but always as advice, never as command. She began to understand that trust was not about obedience. It was about mutual respect and understanding. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low, casting long shadows across the fields, the girl and the cowboy were repairing a section of the fence near the far pasture. She paused, looking at the sun setting over the hills, feeling a sense of peace she had never known. "I used to think freedom meant doing whatever I wanted," she said softly. "But I see now that freedom also means having someone who respects you, even if they are stronger than you." He glanced at her, nodding. "Desperate?"
"Exactly," he said. "Strength is not just physical."
It's patience, understanding, and respect."
The girl smiled faintly, realizing how much she had changed since the day of the auction.
She remembered the fear, the anger, and the defiance that had marked her first moments on the ranch. Now, those feelings still existed, but they were tempered by understanding, courage, and trust. She had learned to face challenges, adapt to new circumstances, and even appreciate the guidance of someone who did not try to control her. As the days passed, the bond between them continued to grow. They shared stories, laughter, and moments of quiet reflection.
The girl taught the cowboy about her culture, sharing songs, stories, and traditions.
He listened with genuine interest, never dismissing her experiences. In turn, he shared lessons from his own life, teaching her practical skills for survival, work, and patience.
Their relationship had evolved from one of mere proximity to something deeper, a connection built on mutual respect, understanding, and shared experience. One evening after a long day of work, the girl sat by the fire reflecting on her journey. She thought about the auction, the fear, and the defiance that had defined her early days. She remembered her initial distrust of the cowboy and how cautious she had been. Brit.
Now she realized that her perspective had changed entirely. She felt a sense of gratitude for the lessons learned, the challenges faced, and the trust that had been built.
Brit. The cowboy joined her quietly, bringing a small cup of water.
"You've grown a lot,"
he said,
sitting down beside her.
Brit. She looked at him, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. I couldn't have done it alone, she admitted. Brit. Neither could I, he replied. But together, we've learned and grown. The girl nodded, realizing the truth in his words. Brit. Trust and cooperation had allowed them to face danger, challenges, and uncertainty. Alone, she might have survived, but together they had thrived. As the night deepened, the girl made a decision.
She could leave the ranch, return to the uncertain world beyond, or she could stay and continue to build a life grounded in respect, trust, and freedom.
Brit. She chose to stay not out of obligation, fear, or dependence, but because she had come to understand the value of connection, guidance, and mutual respect. It was a choice made from her own will, reflecting the independence she had fought to maintain throughout her life. Brit. In the days that followed, she embraced her life on the ranch fully. She continued to work alongside the cowboy, learning more about the land, the animals, and herself. Brit. Each day brought new lessons and experiences, reinforcing her sense of strength, courage, and self-respect. She no longer felt the need to rebel or assert herself aggressively. Instead, she applied her energy to learning, growing, and contributing. Brit. One morning, she stood on the porch watching the sunrise paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold. The cowboy joined her, and for a moment they stood together in silence, appreciating the beauty and calm of the early day. Brit. She felt a sense of completion, a feeling that the journey that began with fear, defiance, and uncertainty had led her to a place of understanding, safety, and personal growth. She realized that she had not only survived the auction, the challenges of the ranch, and the moments of danger, they had shaped her into a stronger, wiser, and more confident person. Brit. The cowboy had not forced her to obey, but he had provided the space, guidance, and respect necessary for her to choose her own path. Brit. Through patience, courage, and mutual understanding, they had forged a bond that was unbreakable, built not on fear or control, but on trust, respect, and shared experience. Brit. By the end of the week, she fully embraced her life on the ranch, no longer seeing it as a place of captivity, but as a home. The cowboy and the girl worked together seamlessly, their relationship now balanced and harmonious. Brit. She had learned the value of patience, courage, and trust, and she had discovered that true freedom did not mean isolation or defiance alone. It meant having the power to choose, the ability to act wisely, and the presence of someone who respected her choices. Brit. As the sun set one evening, painting the sky in shades of deep red and purple, she stood beside the cowboy, watching the animals settle for the night. A sense of peace and fulfillment washed over her. Brit. She had made her choice, faced her fears, and learned what it meant to trust without surrendering her independence. For the first time in her life, she felt truly free, not because no one commanded her, but because she had the power to decide her own path.
The chapter, and indeed the story, closed with her looking out over the land, the cowboy at her side. She had grown from a frightened, defiant girl into a courageous, thoughtful young woman.
Brit. Her journey had been difficult, filled with challenges and moments of doubt, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and capable of trusting others without losing herself. Brit. She realized that freedom, courage, and trust were not contradictions. They were choices, learned through experience and earned through patience. And in this realization, she found peace, purpose, and a sense of belonging she had never known before.